You know, sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can make you feel completely invisible. I spent years being dismissed, belittled, like my existence was just inconvenient. But, well, I didn't stay small. I turned that pain into something fierce, building my life, my career, and eventually confronting the family that never saw me. This isn't just a story of revenge, though it's about independence, growth, and the kind of vindication you have to see to believe. I was 22, just out of college, and honestly, I felt like I was barely holding myself together. My life at the time, tiny, damp studio apartment above a laundromat, surviving on instant noodles and the scraps of optimism I had left. I'd graduated with a computer science degree, buried under student debt, and a resume that had been sent out more than 80 times without a single callback. Each rejection made me feel smaller, but it wasn't just the world outside, it was the world I came home to. See, my family. They weren't warm, not really. Birthdays weren't celebrated for me, for my older brother, Leo. Everything was a production, big dinners, congratulations, gifts, the works. I was the afterthought, a quick text from dad, a clipped email from mom asking if I'd sorted out my job yet. That was my family's version of acknowledgement. The disparity wasn't just disappointing, it was a quiet kind of erasure that gnawed at you. You start to notice it in the little things first, the way they talked over you, how achievements were only ever celebrated if they were convenient or glamorous. For Leo, it was never just encouragement, it was a parade. For me, it was the whisper of disappointment, the reminder that I was somehow less, somehow always in the way. I remember that Tuesday, October 12th, my birthday. I didn't expect anything. Not a dinner, not gifts, not even a mention beyond the polite, obligatory notes. And yet, I wanted well. Maybe just for one night to feel like I was part of a family. I picked up the phone, called Mom. My hands were shaking, and honestly, I thought it was ridiculous. Why was I so nervous about asking for something so small? She answered, clipped and professional, and I felt that familiar chill immediately. I asked if maybe we could go out for dinner. Something casual. My treat, I added quickly. Though all I had was $60, the sigh on the other end of the line was long and heavy. I could picture her, perfectly poised at her mahogany desk, annoyed. She reminded me that Leo was having a celebration for his promotion. Of course, it wasn't just a casual promotion. In our family, it was a life event worthy of the spotlight, the praise, the attention. And then there was me, small, fragile, barely scraping by. I offered to celebrate both of us, to make it easier. The silence that followed was worse than the sigh. Then came the words I'd heard my entire life. Stop making everything about you, just like that. My desire to be acknowledged was labeled selfish. My loneliness, my yearning for connection was twisted into some kind of personal flaw. The weight of it hit me like a physical slap. All those times I had been pushed aside, all the little injustices, the unspoken hierarchy of our family. It all came rushing in at once. I wasn't trying to steal attention. I just wanted to be seen. And instead, I was reminded I wasn't, and that my needs weren't real. I wasn't allowed to feel disappointed or sad. I was supposed to just shrink. I sat in that tiny apartment, the smell of dryer sheets drifting up from below, and it hit me this wasn't a single moment. It was a lifetime of being undervalued. Every school play I performed in that no one came to watch. Every A I brought home that was barely acknowledged. Every quiet triumph I had celebrated alone, all of it, rendered invisible because Leo existed and thrived in our mother's spotlight. Her love wasn't absent, it was selective, and I was just the background. And then there was Dad. He was quiet, steady, the one who didn't make waves. But his silence wasn't peace. It was a tacit approval of the hierarchy. He would rather watch me be steamrolled than disrupt the fragile calm she demanded. So, there I was, fragile and hungry for recognition, watching the golden child parade through life while I was barely noticed, barely acknowledged, barely human to the people who were supposed to be my family. That night, I realized something important. I realized that I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being taught to accept that my existence, my dreams, my needs were secondary, that my very self was something to be managed, minimized, or ignored. And it was crushing, exhausting, and strangely motivating, because even in that moment of raw, stinging loneliness, a small, stubborn spark of defiance lit up inside me. I might have been invisible to them, but I wasn't invisible to myself. And for the first time, I understood that I would have to see, fight, and build my own recognition. Not from them, not from approval, but from the life I could create with my own hands. I remember picking up the phone that birthday, my hands shaking like they had a mind of their own. I told myself it was just a dinner. Nothing dramatic, but the moment I heard her voice, that clipped professional tone, I knew it was going to be a test. I tried to sound breezy, casual, even cheerful. "Hi, Mom. It's my birthday. Maybe we could go out for dinner." "My treat," I said, and I added the last part quickly, almost apologetically, because $60 isn't exactly a grand celebration. And then the sigh, long, heavy, the kind that carries disappointment and irritation all at once. I could picture her sitting there at her massive mahogany desk, pinching the bridge of her nose, annoyed that I even dared to interrupt her day. She reminded me that Leo was having a promotion celebration. Right, of course. Leo, the golden child, the one whose accomplishments were never small, and me, I was the shadow standing at the edge of the spotlight, hoping just for a flicker. I offered to make it simple, celebrate both of us, keep it easy, and then the silence. Oh God, the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was sharp, cold, cutting right through me. Finally, she said it. Words that had been echoing my entire life. "Stop making everything about you." Just like that. My desire to be seen, to be acknowledged, to feel like I belonged, was twisted into selfishness. And I felt my lungs tighten, my throat burn. A hot shame climbed up. And for a second, I wanted to crawl under the floor. I wasn't trying to steal attention. I was trying to be part of my own family. And the rest followed quickly. She told me to just accept that it was Leo's night, that I should let him have his moment. Her voice wasn't angry, it was colder than anger. It was disappointment, disapproval, the quiet reinforcement that I had no claim to joy. I sat there, frozen, staring at the phone, thinking of every birthday ignored, every achievement minimized, every time I had to smile and pretend it didn't hurt. And the realization hit me hard. I hadn't just been overlooked today. I had been overlooked my whole life. I remember saying, almost in a whisper, that I wasn't trying to steal anything, that I just wanted to be a part of my family, but she cut me off before I could finish. "We'll talk about your job search this weekend," she said, almost casually. And then the line went dead. I sat there, the smell of dryer sheets drifting up from below, and I just broke. Not just because of today, but because all the small, cumulative moments had been piling up for years. I felt the grief and loneliness of being treated like an inconvenience, like a guest in my own life. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to their house. I wasn't invited. I didn't care. I needed them to see me. I needed to feel my own presence in a place that had always made me feel invisible. Walking in without knocking, seeing the table set, the banners, the wine. I froze for a heartbeat, caught between anger, fear, and sadness. Mom's smile vanished the second she saw me. Dad looked uncomfortable. Leo laughed. And then she said it again, almost a mantra. "Stop making everything about you." Each word landed like a blow. I looked at them. Mom, Leo, Dad, and in that moment, I didn't see a family. I saw a performance, a story I had been forced to watch my whole life, a play where I was never the lead. And then clarity hit me. My body stopped shaking. My heart steadied. I knew what I had to do. Not argue, not plead, not explain. I just said, quietly but firmly, "You're right. I'm done." And I turned, walked out the front door. And for the first time in my life, I left the narrative they had written for me behind. I got in my old sedan, drove to a 24-hour diner, and ordered a slice of cherry pie. I ate it alone, under the fluorescent lights, and cried for the last time over them. That night, I understood in my family. I wasn't just overlooked. I was the inconvenience, and I decided right then that I wouldn't be small anymore. After walking out that night, something inside me shifted. I was 22, utterly alone. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need anyone's permission or approval to exist, to succeed, to build something that mattered. My tiny studio apartment, once a symbol of failure and isolation, became my fortress. The damp walls, the faint smell of laundry from below, the flickering fluorescent light. Everything that had felt oppressive now felt like the perfect incubator. I had nothing to distract me, nothing to placate, and that clarity. It was electric. I had been invisible to them, and for so long, I tried to carve out a space in a family that would never acknowledge me. But now, invisibility was power. I could work without interruption, focus without guilt. I poured every ounce of my energy into coding, teaching myself business management from library books, devouring every tutorial, every example I could find. My mind was hungry, obsessive, and for the first time, it was mine. I had a small inheritance, $10,000 left by my grandmother, the only person who had ever truly seen me. My parents, of course, had plans for it, a down payment on a condo, a life mapped out for me in someone else's terms. But I didn't want their safety net. I wanted to build my own. I transferred every cent into my checking account, and I told myself, this is my seed. This is my declaration that I was done being small. That money became more than cash. It was a statement. It was freedom. I started with a project I'd tinkered with in college, a simple organizational app. But the lonely nights and the sting of rejection pushed me to rebuild it from scratch, fueled by cheap coffee and the kind of determination that only comes from having nothing to lose. I coded for hours that blurred together into days, slept in short bursts, ate minimally, and dreamed endlessly. Each line of code, each debugged function was a small act of defiance against a family that had never believed in me, a world that had dismissed me as irrelevant. It wasn't glamorous. My life was minimalistic, almost Spartan. But there was power in the simplicity. I had no social obligations, no distractions, no one to undermine me. My small studio was my universe, and I was the architect. Slowly, the app began to take shape. I incorporated it, ran the servers, and launched a bare-bones marketing campaign. I called it Lighthouse Logic, a tribute to the one person who had ever been a beacon for me. My grandmother. Every step forward, every milestone felt like a reclamation of my life. For months, it was just me and the code. I was invisible to my family, but the isolation allowed me to see myself clearly. I started to feel competent, capable, and alive in a way I hadn't before. The loneliness, which had once crushed me, became a kind of fuel. Every slight, every dismissal I'd endured became motivation to build something tangible, something undeniable. It was no longer about their approval. It was about proving, first to myself, that I could shape a life on my own terms. By the time the first small wins came a positive review from a tech blog, a mid-level company expressing interest, I realized I had transformed. I was no longer the fragile, overlooked girl in a tiny studio above a laundromat. I was a founder, a strategist, a creator. Every sleepless night had been a brick in the foundation of something real. Every moment of isolation had been a workshop where I honed not just skills, but confidence, resilience, and vision. Looking back, that period of rejection and loneliness was not wasted. It was the crucible that forged my independence. I had taken the tools I was given my education, my inheritance, my determination, and used them to build a world where I was in control. From feeling invisible, I became the architect of my own life, the one who set the rules, created opportunities, and eventually wielded the power to confront a family that had never seen me as anything but an inconvenience. It was messy, raw, exhausting, but every moment was mine, and that ownership was everything. To really understand why I was always the invisible one, you have to understand my family. My mother, Margaret, was obsessed with appearances. Not in a casual, charming way, but in a way that felt performative. Everything was for show. The house immaculate, the family photos staged, our achievements measured by how they looked to the outside world, rather than what they actually were. She ran our household like a university department, precise, organized, but cold. Her attention was reserved for the polished, the impressive, the socially acceptable. Leo fit that mold perfectly. Tall, charming, with that easy smile that disarmed people for 10 minutes before you realized he was empty. My mother adored him. She poured resources, time, and energy into shaping him, into making sure he never faltered in public. And me, I was the tinkerer, the quiet one with paint on my jeans, solder burns on my hands, a love for computers that she deemed unladylike and niche. She didn't actively hate me, but she didn't see me either. Every interest I had, every success I achieved, was secondary, almost an inconvenience in her curated world. Then there was my father, frank, quiet, steady, stable, and above all, invisible. He was the perfect complement to Margaret, content to fade into the background and let her dictate the family narrative. I used to think he was just calm, but I realized over time that his silence was more than that. It was compliance, a desperate attempt to avoid confrontation, to maintain peace at any cost. He saw what was happening to me, the inequity, the subtle slights, the constant marginalization, and he did nothing. Or, at least, that's how it felt. He wasn't cruel, but his need for calm and stability came at my expense. His inaction reinforced my mother's favoritism and my brother's entitlement. And in its own way, it was just as damaging as any active insult. Leo, my brother, was the golden child, and he knew it. He was entitled, arrogant, lazy in ways that were invisible to everyone but me. Everything came easy for him. Every time he needed something, a tutor, a car, a connection to a finance department, my mother provided it. He internalized that completely. He saw my struggles, my tiny studio apartment, the nights I went hungry or worked until my eyes blurred, and he didn't care. Or maybe he didn't even notice. He was insulated from consequences, and the world revolved around him in ways I didn't have the luxury to imagine. To him, I wasn't just background, I was a non-player in his narrative. My achievements weren't celebrated, my failures were a source of quiet amusement or irritation. He wasn't malicious most of the time, just completely unaware, utterly self-absorbed. And that made him dangerous in a subtle way, because he learned early that my presence was optional. Growing up with them, I absorbed it all. The mother who measured love in appearances, the father who hid behind silence, and the brother who took everything for granted. They created an ecosystem where my needs, my desires, my identity were secondary by default. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but insidious. I learned early that asking for attention, recognition, or even basic care was an imposition, and over time, I internalized it. I became small, careful, hesitant, always calculating how not to upset the delicate balance that my mother demanded, how not to inconvenience my father's peace, how not to provoke Leo's disdain. And yet, in observing them, I also learned a lot. I saw patterns. I understood how power, even in subtle forms, works. I saw the ways entitlement can be enabled, the ways compliance can maintain injustice, the ways obsession with image can warp love into performance. And I realized, slowly, that I didn't have to accept any of it. I didn't have to shrink, didn't have to disappear. That awareness, that clarity became a tool. I could use their traits against the story they tried to impose on me. I could see the machinery of my marginalization and start imagining a life outside of it. And that imagination, more than anything else, became the first step toward taking control, toward turning invisibility into power. With my grandmother's $10,000 inheritance in my account, I felt a mix of fear and excitement that I can barely put into words. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me a chance to start something entirely my own. I took that money and poured it into Lighthouse Logic, a name that felt like a tribute to her, the one person who had ever really seen me. I rented server space, incorporated the company, and even with the bare minimum, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. The studio apartment became both my lab and my sanctuary. I spent endless nights hunched over my laptop, coding until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned. Sleep was optional, coffee my only companion. I devoured business books from the library, tutorials online, anything that could teach me how to run a company, market an app, manage servers, and handle clients. It was overwhelming, and some days I wanted to quit, to crawl back to a life that felt safe, if invisible. But the memory of every dismissal, every ignored birthday, every moment I'd felt small kept me moving forward. I wasn't just building an app, I was building myself. Money was tight. I ate cheap meals, often just instant noodles, and lived minimally to stretch every dollar. There were moments I questioned myself, wondering if I had been naive to think I could turn a tiny project into a business. But slowly, the little victories started to show. The first positive review on a tech blog felt monumental. It wasn't just praise for the app, it was recognition for me, for my effort, for proving to the world that I existed and could create something meaningful. That one small acknowledgement was like fuel, pushing me to iterate, to improve, to dream bigger. Clients trickled in. A small company in Austin wanted a 500-seat license, the first real money I had ever earned. It wasn't a windfall, but it was enough to move into a tiny office, just 2 rooms, and hire my first employee, Ben, a talented young coder who shared my obsession with creating something extraordinary. Having someone to share ideas with, to brainstorm, and to push boundaries with changed everything. Suddenly, Lighthouse Logic wasn't just my solo project. It was a growing company with real potential. Those first years were grueling. I lived like a ghost, isolated from social life, consumed by coding, planning, and refining. But the isolation had a silver lining. It gave me clarity, focus, and the ability to transform every ounce of loneliness into productivity. Every late night debugging session, every failed feature, every lesson learned was a brick in the foundation of a company and a version of myself I had never met before. Competent, decisive, and resilient. Recognition came slowly, almost quietly. Tech blogs praised the app as intuitive and powerful, giving Lighthouse Logic credibility I hadn't dared to hope for. Investors started to notice, first angels, then a Series A. With each step, my confidence grew. I was no longer the overlooked daughter, the one who had been told to stop making everything about herself. I was a founder, a CEO, someone whose work demanded attention and respect. The transformation wasn't instant. It was gradual, punctuated by small successes that built upon one another, each one cementing the idea that I could craft a life on my own terms. By the end of those early years, I had left behind the fragile, anxious 22-year-old who sat alone in a damp studio apartment, uncertain of her future. I had become a strategic thinker, a problem solver, and someone capable of running a company from the ground up. Lighthouse Logic wasn't just a tech company, it was a declaration. Every line of code, every sleepless night, every painstaking decision was proof that I could define my own worth. I had gone from invisible to undeniable, from reactive to proactive, and from a young adult struggling to survive to a CEO who was finally in control of her own narrative. By the time Lighthouse Logic was making waves in the tech world, I had become someone entirely different from the fragile, overlooked girl of my early 20s. The sleepless nights, the constant coding, the endless iterations it had all built. Not just a company, but a form of power I had never had before. And with that power came clarity. I could finally see the full picture of my family, their secrets, and the ways they had manipulated, belittled, and used me for years. My success wasn't just about me anymore. It was leverage, a tool I could use to expose the truth and reclaim my life. I started carefully, deliberately. I hired a private investigator, someone trustworthy, someone who could dig into the threads of my family's financial dealings without tipping them off. I asked her to look into Leo, specifically, and to map out his connections to mom and dad. It felt strange at first, almost melodramatic, but my instincts, sharpened by years of surviving on my own, told me this was necessary. I wasn't just chasing gossip, I was collecting evidence. My parents had always controlled the narrative, hiding the inconvenient truths behind their carefully constructed facades. Now it was my turn to illuminate everything. The results came back faster than I expected. What I learned was staggering. Leo's career in finance, which had always sounded so impressive from the outside, was a house of cards. He'd been fired from his donor-sponsored position years prior for client mismanagement, yet he continued to live off my parents, racking up enormous debts while claiming to run a legitimate consultancy. Worse, Dad had co-signed a massive business loan, $250,000, using the family home as collateral. Leo had squandered it on a high-rise apartment, a flashy car, and investments that evaporated. My mother's pride in him wasn't just blind, it was enabling, and in some ways, complicit. The leverage I had built in my company was the key to seeing it all, to understanding it all, and eventually to confronting them with irrefutable truth. I didn't rush to act. I let the information settle, studied it, and planned carefully. The first confrontation came through controlled communication. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was calculated. I waited until I had all the pieces together: my company's growth, the investigative report, the bank records, emails, and all the financial documentation. My goal wasn't to humiliate for the sake of revenge. It was to reveal the truth in a way that even my family couldn't deny or spin. The first call I ignored deliberately. It was from Mom. Her voice on voicemail was thick with syrupy affection, a tone I hadn't heard in years. She spoke of missing me, of pride, of love, and then subtly tried to lure me back into the fold under the guise of reconciliation. I knew better. Her words were carefully crafted, aimed at manipulating, softening me into compliance. I let it go to voicemail, feeling the strange thrill of control. I wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. I was observing. I was strategizing. The next step was confrontation in person, but not at home. I stayed in a hotel, a neutral ground, and prepared meticulously. When they arrived, Mom, Dad, Leo trailing behind them, it felt like stepping into a battlefield. Calm. I was calm. I was collected. Gone was the trembling, hesitant girl who had begged for acknowledgement. I introduced my lawyer, Sarah, a sharp, no-nonsense presence who further underscored that this was serious. Mom tried to assert control immediately, scolding me for hiding, for ignoring their calls. Leo jumped in, demanding I fix his financial mess, but I had all the facts. And this time, I wasn't intimidated. I presented the evidence slowly, deliberately. The $80,000 Leo had misappropriated from the Hendersons, the $50,000 from Mom's college friend, the ballooning loan, all meticulously documented. Their faces changed. First disbelief, then shock, then panic. Mom recoiled. Leo paled. Dad's eyes widened as the reality settled in. For the first time, they weren't in control. I wasn't attacking from weakness. I was dismantling their narrative from strength. I didn't need to yell or cry. I simply stated the facts, let the evidence speak, and watched as the carefully curated illusions they'd relied upon for years crumbled. The tension was palpable. I watched as Mom's poised mask cracked, revealing the panic beneath. Leo, who had always been arrogant and entitled, now looked cornered, exposed for the first time in his life. Dad, the silent enabler, the man who had watched and done nothing, was frozen, finally confronted with the tangible consequences of his compliance. Each revelation hit them like waves, and me, I stayed steady, calm, resolute. This was not about theatrics. This was about clarity, truth, and finally taking control of my own story. Over the following days, the situation escalated in ways that confirmed my suspicions. Mom tried to spin the narrative to extended family, painting me as paranoid, delusional, and obsessed with money. Leo attempted to threaten and beg, trying to manipulate to regain some semblance of power. But my preparation was thorough. I had every document, every record, every fact lined up. My success had given me the resources and confidence to confront them on my terms. I wasn't just a powerless daughter anymore. I was a CEO, a strategist, someone who had the means to demand truth and transparency. Every interaction became a chess move. I didn't react emotionally to their attempts to guilt or intimidate me. Instead, I relied on calm observation, presenting facts when necessary, letting their desperation reveal the cracks in their story. It was intoxicating, in a way not revenge in its messy, emotional form, but a quiet, calculated dismantling of the control they had exercised over me for years. And with each revelation, each confrontation, the narrative shifted. The roles reversed. I was no longer the invisible, ignored daughter. I had become the force they could not dismiss, the light illuminating their secrets, the one who held the truth in her hands. It wasn't instant gratification. It wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling. Each piece of evidence, each confrontation, each subtle display of confidence chipping away at the carefully maintained facades of my family. I realized that success wasn't just about personal achievement, it was power. And with that power, I could finally claim my place, not as a guest in their lives, but as an independent, autonomous individual who refused to be invisible any longer. Every late night, every dollar of inheritance invested, every sleepless coding session had led to this moment: clarity, leverage, and the ability to finally expose the deceit that had defined my life for so long. The hotel confrontation was tense from the moment they arrived. Mom, Leo, and Dad walked into the lobby cafe, and I felt that familiar churn in my stomach, not fear exactly, but the anticipation of finally being seen on my own terms. I was calm, though, more composed than I had been at 22. I introduced Sarah, my lawyer, to make it clear that this wasn't a casual discussion or an emotional outburst. It was a serious, controlled confrontation. Mom tried to dominate immediately, scolding me for hiding, for not answering their calls. Leo jumped in, accusatory and demanding, insisting I fix the mess he had created. But I wasn't rattled. I had the evidence, and that evidence spoke louder than any of their words. I laid it all out methodically. The misappropriated funds from the Hendersons, the money taken from Mom's college friend, the $250,000 loan Dad had co-signed, all documented with wire transfers, bank statements, emails, the works. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I simply presented the facts, letting each piece sink in. The reactions were instantaneous and visceral. Mom's confident. Polished mask crumbled first, revealing panic, disbelief, and then anger. Leo's face went white, his arrogance evaporating in the face of hard, irrefutable evidence. Dad, who had always been the quiet observer, froze. For the first time, he realized the consequences of his compliance, the cost of his silence. Mom tried to argue, to deny, to reframe the narrative, but I stayed calm, responding only with facts. Leo attempted to threaten me, to intimidate me with accusations, but his words were hollow against the documentation I held. Every time they tried to gaslight or shift blame, I leaned in, slow and deliberate, reminding them of each specific instance. The suspense was palpable, almost suffocating, but I refused to break my composure. For years, I had been small, overlooked, dismissed, but now I controlled the space, the pace, and the narrative. As the confrontation unfolded, I noticed Dad's expression change. It was subtle at first, an involuntary tightening around the eyes. The slight slump of shoulders, but it grew into something profound. He wasn't angry or defensive. He was absorbing the weight of what had been hidden from him. The full extent of Leo's deceit and the role his own inaction had played. I realized that in that moment, he was finally seeing the truth in its entirety. Mom's panic intensified. Leo's fear sharpened. But Dad, he was awakening to morality, to responsibility, to the realization that peace at all costs had allowed this situation to fester. I could feel the tension in the room, like electricity. Other patrons in the lobby had begun to notice, but I didn't care. This was about more than appearances now. This was about dismantling a carefully constructed web of lies. I remained composed, letting the calm in my voice contrast with the chaos in theirs. Each fact I presented, each connection I explained, chipped away at their defenses. Mom tried to regain control, to assert authority, but it was too late. Leo's usual arrogance was gone, replaced with visible panic, his hands twitching, his posture slumped, and Dad's eyes finally lifted, meeting mine, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. He had understood, and he would no longer hide behind compliance. I could see the emotional weight of years of lies pressing down on them. Mom's face, once sharp and controlled, was now raw with panic and disbelief. Leo's mask of entitlement had completely fallen away, exposing the fear beneath, and Dad, who had always been the silent observer, now bore the weight of truth, confronting both his son and wife with the knowledge that silence had consequences. I remained steady, presenting each detail, each transaction, each misdeed, until the room felt heavy with inevitability. There was no arguing with evidence, no deflecting responsibility. The confrontation was a culmination of years of careful observation, preparation, and the strategic use of the power I had built for myself. By the end of that encounter, I had achieved what I came for: clarity, acknowledgement, and the exposure of the deception that had defined my family. My calm authority, backed by facts and preparation, had dismantled their control. Mom was unmoored, Leo was cornered, and Dad was awake to the truth. It wasn't theatrical or dramatic in the sense of yelling or screaming. It was precise, deliberate, and devastating in its quiet authority. In that moment, I wasn't just confronting them. I was reclaiming my life, my narrative, and finally asserting the power and independence that had taken years to cultivate. The father's 60th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration of family, a showcase of success and loyalty, but I knew better. I arrived just as the speeches were beginning, slipping into the ballroom unnoticed at first. The room fell silent the second I stepped in. Colleagues, old family friends, and relatives all turned to see the daughter who had been written out of their story for a decade. Mom's face paled, her grip on the champagne flute tightening. Leo's eyes narrowed, body stiff, trying to mask panic with bravado. Dad simply froze, unsure, caught in the middle of what was about to unfold. Mom attempted to recover, offering a strained smile and a soft, "We weren't expecting you," but I didn't falter. I walked calmly toward the front, confident, measured. Leo jumped to his feet, voice sharp. "You're not welcome here. Get her out." I ignored him. The silence in the room grew heavier. I cleared my throat and addressed the guests. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Lauren, the daughter you've been hearing so much about. The difficult one." The words hung in the air, deliberate, drawing attention not as an accusation, but as a statement of truth. Mom hissed, eyes darting, trying to regain control. "You are making a scene." I met her gaze lightly. Conversational, almost casual. I learned from the best. "Mom." My voice was steady, cutting through the whispers. I looked at Dad, who sat quietly, hands folded, a man hollowed out by years of silent complicity. "You are all here to celebrate my father's 60th birthday," I said, pacing just enough to draw the eyes of the room. "And Mom is right. Family is about weathering storms. But she and my brother, they've been the storm." Gasps fluttered across the room. Conversation stuttered. Leo's face flushed red as he tried to interject. But I held up a thick manila envelope, my calm authority making interruptions impossible. "Then you won't mind if I share some of my delusions with your investors," I said, deliberately addressing the crowd, including a few elderly couples who had invested money through Leo. I turned to them directly. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry to hear about the $80,000 you invested with Leo. The bank statements are here. It didn't go into a tech fund. It went to a down payment on his Porsche." The room fell silent. Mrs. Henderson covered her mouth, stunned. Eyes widened everywhere. Mom froze, her mask of civility cracking visibly. Leo dropped into his chair, head in his hands, color draining from his face. I pressed on, calm, deliberate. "Mom, you've done a wonderful job protecting this family, especially protecting Leo from consequences. You've been covering up years of mismanagement and deceit. But the $250,000 loan you took out on your house, the one you called me to pay off, that wasn't just a bad investment. That was to silence other victims. You're not just an enabler. You're an accomplice to fraud." The guests were frozen. Whispers rippled through the ballroom. I walked to Dad, placed the envelope in front of him. "Dad," I said, voice softening for the first time, "this is everything. The proof, the lies, the cost of silence. Your peace has cost people their life savings, and it's about to cost you your home. Is it worth it?" Dad looked at me, then at Mom, then Leo. His eyes widened as the full weight of their actions hit him. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood up, straightened. He picked up the envelope, not to hide it, but to hold it, to acknowledge it. And then, in a voice clear and shaking but unmistakable, he said, "No more. Margaret, my daughter is telling the truth. All of it." He turned to Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. "I'll make this right, I promise you." It was quiet, devastating, and final. Mom let out a small, strangled cry. Leo didn't move, his head still buried in his hands. The performance was over. The room, once tense and expectant, now held the aftermath of truth. The dominoes had fallen. Dad's decisive action was the anchor, validating everything I had revealed. I turned and walked out, leaving the chaos and whispers behind me, finally free of the weight of their narrative, finally claiming the clarity, vindication, and power I had fought so hard to achieve. After the public confrontation at Dad's birthday, everything changed fast. Leo's lies and deceptions, once carefully hidden, unraveled completely. Within the week, he was arrested for multiple counts of fraud and theft by deception. The authorities had all the evidence I had gathered, confirmed, and corroborated. His entire consultancy collapsed under investigation. A house of cards built on other people's trust and money. For the first time, I saw the consequences of actions I had only witnessed from the sidelines for so long. It was dramatic, yes, but I felt detached, calm. I hadn't done this to punish him personally. I had done it to ensure justice for the people he had hurt. Mom's downfall was quieter, but no less devastating. In the world, she had meticulously crafted her social circle, her professional reputation. There was no audience left. Friends she had cultivated over decades turned away. Once they understood her role in enabling Leo's deceit, her university faced public scrutiny, and it was strongly suggested that she take early retirement. She moved into a small, sterile condo across town. Her grand performance, once so tightly controlled and polished, had no stage left. She had lost the validation and the appearance of control she craved, and it was absolute. Leo was gone. The audience had disappeared, and she was forced to confront a life stripped of performance. I watched this unfold without glee. It wasn't satisfaction. It was acknowledgement that truth had its reckoning, and that the power I had worked so hard to gain was now being used to restore balance, not simply to punish. Dad, on the other hand, became the person I had always hoped he could be. True to his word, he liquidated assets, sold the house, and along with his retirement savings, reimbursed every cent to Leo's victims. His action was slow, deliberate, and required courage. It was his way of atoning for the years of silence, for the passive complicity that had allowed harm to persist. I didn't see him as the same man who had watched and done nothing. I saw him as someone who had finally chosen integrity over comfort. Our reconciliation was careful and cautious. We met over coffee, then dinner, talking slowly, learning about each other not as father and daughter within a controlled narrative, but as two people who had survived, endured, and grown. It wasn't instant trust. It wasn't a magical undoing of the past, but it was real. It was grounded. It was a beginning. I chose how to use my resources deliberately. The inheritance, the company, the access I had gained. It was never about personal revenge. I used it to ensure that Leo's victims were protected, reimbursed, and supported. I funded the recovery process, set up a community fund in my grandmother's name to help victims of elder financial fraud. Every step I took was rooted in justice, not retaliation. I wanted accountability, transparency, and protection for those who had been harmed. Not a show of dominance over my family. My mother and brother were facing the consequences of their actions. Yes, but the focus remained on rectifying harm, not settling personal scores. The aftermath was, in some ways, almost surreal. Leo was sentenced, receiving a relatively light prison term only because Dad had fully repaid the victims. Mom's social exile was complete. She was left to confront a life of quiet, bitter reflection. And I had built a life of independence, not from spite, but from the refusal to let injustice go unchecked. I had created something tangible, lighthouse logic, a career, and the power to ensure accountability. I had walked out at 22 feeling like an inconvenience. Now, I felt the opposite. I was the one holding the narrative, the one shaping outcomes, the one capable of turning injustice into tangible change. I found personal peace not in their downfall, but in the process of reclaiming my autonomy and establishing fairness. The vindication wasn't about showing them who was right. It was about affirming to myself that I was capable, resilient, and deserving of recognition on my own terms. I had survived loneliness, rejection, and marginalization, and transformed it into strategy, action, and measurable impact. My success had become a tool for accountability, my clarity a shield against manipulation, my determination a force that could not be silenced or redirected by their whims. Looking back, the journey from that tiny studio apartment above the laundromat to a position where I could influence justice and provide restitution to others was staggering. It wasn't a straight line. It was messy, painful, and occasionally terrifying. There were nights of doubt, moments when I longed for the comfort of recognition I had been denied, and hours when isolation felt crushing. But those struggles were the foundation. They gave me insight into human behavior, into family dynamics, into resilience and strategy. They taught me patience, foresight, and the power of calm authority. Now, I live in a world I've built with a company that operates with integrity, a life structured on my own values, and a sense of peace that comes from having reclaimed my story. I see Dad occasionally, sharing moments of cautious reconnection. I have no intention of reconnecting with Mom or Leo. That chapter is closed, but I am present, fully, in a life I designed with the confidence that comes from knowing my worth and the clarity that comes from experience. I am independent, I am vindicated, and most importantly, I am free, not just from their control, but from the patterns that once defined me. I walked out of that house at 22 thinking I was invisible, thinking I was the problem. Now I know the truth. I was never making it about me. I was simply the one who refused to accept injustice, the one who survived, the one who insisted on seeing the truth, and that insistence changed everything. And that's the journey walking out, feeling invisible and slowly building a life defined on my own terms. Independence, growth, and reclaiming your story can change everything, even when it feels impossible. If this story stayed with you, maybe give it a like and subscribe to catch more stories of resilience, triumph, and personal breakthroughs. Remember, It's not about waiting for others to see you. It's about creating your own path and owning it completely.